Hello, thank you very much for coming to this presentation. I'll be presenting this topic, University Teachers' Challenges and Expectations in Bilingual and Multilingual Disciplinary Literacy Instruction and Findings from our Qualitative Cross-disciplinary Study. My name is Jana Zerzová. I come from the Czech Republic, but there are also 4 other colleagues working with me on this research project who come from 2 other countries, Albania and Turkey, and this is why they are listed on this slide together with me, but it will be only me present here today. I'd like to first say that our research project is part of a cost network, CLIL. This stands for CLIL Network for Languages in Education towards bilingual and multilingual disciplinary literacies. From now on, I will probably be only saying BMDLs because this is a very long expression and difficult to pronounce actually. And this cost action is actually coming towards its end. It finishes this year, but our research is part of it. The action, CLIL is focused on the conceptualization of BMDLs, and there were 2 main position papers written, one in 2024 and the other one in 2026. So if you are interested in the topic, these 2 major papers that are listed in the references at the back of the PowerPoint presentation, these are essential reading, but there have also been many more publications and articles published on this topic. I'll first define disciplinary literacy here for you, but very briefly. Shannon understand it as the specialized ways reading, writing, and oral language are used in academic disciplines. This is a very brief definition, the shortest possible, but this definition and disciplinary literacy, the notion is taken in the cost action and applied to multilingual context. So we will have a look at this in more detail now together. I'll first show you these 2 trees. These are BMDL's dimensions, and I'll later explain why there are these 2 trees and not just one. The first tree comes from 2024, the second one from 2026. You can see they are not identical, although they are very similar to each other. So let's have a look at the first tree first. You can see there are 5 dimensions in it: bi and multilingual and translingual dimension, then technological, critical dimension, functional dimension, multi and trans-semiotic dimension. In a while, I'll describe these very briefly, but let's first just have a look at the tree. We see that the dimensions are of the same size here in this tree, and there is an overlap among them, of course, necessarily. That's also illogical, right? But when we have a look at the second tree, we see the dimensions are not identical in their sizes, and the organization of the tree here and of the dimensions is different. So let's first have a look at what these dimensions stand for. We'll very briefly have a look at their definitions, but really very briefly. The first dimension is bi or multi translingual dimension that describes the fact that disciplinary meaning making is done through the dynamic language repertoires and multilingual practices. So this is the multilingual component of BMDLs. Then there is the multi and trans-semiotic dimension that tries to address the fact that learning and teaching are done by various semiotic resources such as visual, spatial, embodied, material, linguistic, etc. So these are essential components of education, of teaching and learning. Then there is the functional, textual dimension. The students engage with various form structures, functions of communication in their classes. Then there is the critical dimension. Reasoning and inquiry strategies and practices applied by teachers in their classes. And then the technological digital dimension. assessing, contrasting, constructing and presenting knowledge happens within this dimension and various applications, etc. So this is just a very brief description of the 5 dimensions, and if you are interested in a more thorough description, I would definitely have a look at the papers mentioned earlier in the presentation, because they are described in more detail there. We'll go back to the tree now. We see this is the first tree we saw on the previous slide to the right. And when we compare it with this tree and this one, we see that the dimensions are not identical in their size, and the trees are also differently organized. And what these pictures try to communicate to us is the fact that each discipline is different in how it addresses disciplinary literacy, and also multilingual disciplinary literacy. And for example, physics is very different from history in how the classes are structured and what they put stress on. So this is what the trees try to communicate. We can see that in the last one, for example, the technological digital dimension is actually huge. So it seems this is the basis of that discipline, and then the other ones build on that. But there are also other disciplines in which this one may be not that prominent, and the stress is put on other disciplines. So that's why the conceptualization uses this metaphor of the tree, because it nicely visually communicates the uniqueness of the disciplines and what the disciplines put stress on, where they place the emphasis. I'll now describe our research within the cost action. And this framework, these 5 dimensions, they are the core of our research. Yet at first we addressed the topic of our research a bit differently, so I'll describe that, and then I'll also explain how we want to analyze the data further. So our first research question was that we wanted to find out what challenges tertiary teachers report in teaching BMDLs, and then we were also interested in what their expectations of their students are, and also what their expectations of their secondary education is. That means secondary education of their students, not their own, of course, and regarding BMDL's development, of course. We used a survey instrument, or rather an interview protocol, developed within the CLIL-NETLA cost action, and our sample consisted of 41 university teachers. These represented diverse disciplines, and the total number was 26. They came from 4 countries: Czech Republic, Turkey, Kuwait, and Albania. And as to these diverse disciplines, 12 of them were natural science disciplines and then social sciences. The languages of instructions were English, German, and Arabic. So we were not only interested in ME instruction, English as a medium for instruction, but also other languages. So the language of instruction was actually not important, although these languages necessarily differ a lot. What we did was a thematic analysis of the data we collected. It was a lot of data. We conducted a combination of deductive and deductive coding, and we developed a code book and a manual that contains samples, quotations from the teachers, because we really wanted it to be quite practical to use, because all of the codes, they are high inference categories actually, and the coding process was very challenging. This is why we went through 2 rounds of trying to achieve intercoder reliability agreement, which we succeeded in eventually. It was quite a long process, and after we achieved it, we coded all of the data, and we used NVivo for this process. rather than manual coding, because that would have been very challenging. So the software was very helpful in the analysis. These are our findings, and I'll first talk about the challenges. When we analyzed the data, we found out that the challenges are grouped in line with our questions. The teacher describes teachers' challenges, their own, but also their students' challenges. And we found subgroups in these challenges. And for teachers, these were teaching the disciplines, of course, teaching in a foreign language that's not their mother tongue, so either English or Arabic or German, challenges in teaching critical thinking to students, and then cultural perspectives, background perspectives. And as to the students' challenges, the tertiary teachers described comprehension of disciplinary literacy and then learning disciplinary literacies and applying them. And as to the expectations, this is a very long list of the codes and subcodes, so I'll describe it very briefly. What's important to say is that the expectations match the challenges. Of course, there is a connection between these two, and I'll then later get to it when I describe the major findings and implications from our research. So as to the expectations, we discovered there were two main themes and many sub-themes within these two themes. So the main themes they are here involved. First of all, it was university teachers' expectations of their students, but then the second group is university teachers' expectations of secondary education teachers of their students. And the sub-themes are listed here in the brackets, and there are many. So let's just briefly have a look at them and maybe mention one of them. One expectations of the students for the tertiary teachers was, for example, that they expected the students to possess some academic writing skills, to be able to participate in their classes, or be familiar with some basic concepts from their discipline, etc. And then the expectations of the secondary education teachers of their students, there were really very many, but when we have a look at them, and let me just read a few of them: promoting critical thinking, teaching discipline-specific knowledge and practicing it, encouraging students to read, promoting interdisciplinary group work, teaching soft skills, promoting argumentation, etc., etc. So when we have a look at these themes from above, we see university teachers really expect secondary education teachers to make their teaching very student-centered. So this is a theme within it. So what are the major findings and implications? Well, first of all, the teachers' own challenges and the challenges of their students, the university teacher report, are actually a result of the students' prior preparation at their secondary schools. So they stem from them. These are the roots. And the tertiary teachers, they perceive there is a gap between classroom reality and the expectations they have. So very often they report there is sort of deficiency in secondary education, and that secondary education does not prepare the students for the transition from secondary level education to tertiary level education. So this was the core theme in the accounts of the teachers that was repeated by them. And what are the implications? Well, the implications obviously are that the tertiary teachers call for stronger secondary education. They would like to see students supported when they transit from secondary education to tertiary education, and they did not develop on how this support should be organized, structured, or what exactly it should look like. So this is something to work on further, because there are a lot of possibilities, of course. That goes together with the enhancement of cooperation between secondary education and tertiary education. and the teachers were asked about whether they already cooperate with secondary teachers or not, whether they ever meet them, discuss them, whether they do training together, etc. And the answers differed. Some of them said, yes, this happens at a certain level, but more of it should be done. But there was the topic common to many of those who mentioned that it already happens, and there was of course time restrictions and money as well, because all of them complained of lack of time, saying if we had more time for this, we could cooperate more closely and we could make the transition for the students smoother. But this doesn't happen in practice, and also it's not supported, let's say, from above. So it's not systematic. It's rather people interested in it who take part in various activities, or tertiary teachers. They actually go to secondary schools. They know some teachers there and they cooperate. But what they complained about was systematic support. So it does happen, cooperation between secondary and tertiary teachers, but it's not that well organized. It rather depends on their own interests. And that brings us to the last topic, which was a call for blended professional development courses for secondary education teachers and tertiary teachers, that they would meet and they could actually get trained and they would work on making this transition for the students smoother. So these are the major findings from our research, and we first wanted to analyze what the challenges were, what the weaknesses maybe were in the system, and what the teachers reported. But you can see that these findings are not, the way they are structured now, they are not aligned to the 5 dimensions, to the 3, if you can still recall it. So these are our preliminary findings, but what we would like to do next with the data is we would like to structure it, taking these BMDL's dimensions into account, because that will help us understand whether some of the dimensions are maybe paid less attention to and more support should be given to students within their secondary education, maybe in this dimension, or this may also vary across disciplines, of course. So we don't know, we are not sure yet, but this is what we would like to do next, to structure the data a bit differently, to see how what the teachers reported relates to the dimensions and whether there are any important implications for secondary and tertiary education from their reports concerning the dimensions we saw in the 3s. So thank you very much for your attention. There are my references, sources listed at the end, and these 2 papers I mentioned in the presentation from 2024 and 2026 are listed here as well, of course. So if you're more interested in the conceptualization of BMDLs or the individual dimensions, they are described in much more depth in these 2 papers. And the visualization of the 3s is also described in it. The first 3 we saw on the left is described in the first paper, and then these updated, let's say, 3s are described in the second position paper. So these are very interesting papers to read, connected to the topic. Thank you very much once again.